Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Devlog series for Circle of Orion, a turn-based Japanese-style RPG that I'm developing in Unreal Engine. And welcome to the one-year anniversary! It was just about a year ago where I launched this series and started this journey to make this game. And I'm saying it at the end of the video, but I'll say it now as well. Thanks to everyone who's watched since then. The constant encouragement and feedback and stuff is what has kept my motivation to keep this going, and I really appreciate it. So, the funny thing is, it's been a year, and it's not like I haven't gotten anything done, but I feel like I should have gotten way more done than I actually did. Honestly, it's becoming difficult to show progress on a lot of these devlogs because most of the work I'm doing isn't stuff that's easy to show off. The main three things that I've been working on recently have been continuing to write the script, actually getting the dialogue and the events all written out, which is obviously stuff I can't show yet. Adding in the locations in correspondence to the actual script that I'm writing. And thirdly, as I've been making a lot of improvements to the fundamental code, but that's been going into the Omega game framework itself. So it's kind of back-end stuff and improvements there, kind of integrating some of the systems I built for Circle of Orion directly into Omega, like music and factions, so it's not really stuff I can show off. But nonetheless, let's go over what I have for the month. To start off with, I added some new visual effects for magical skills. This is something I posted on Twitter and YouTube, a little video showing off the magical effects, but yeah, again, this is an asset I got from the marketplace. Changed a couple things, but for the most part, it's the same as it is. The method I'm kind of preferring for battle actions right now is to use sequences, because I have a lot more control over them and a control over the timing. Now, this was a little bit difficult to figure out, specifically because right now, setting up custom events in Sequencer is kind of difficult, and specifically if you want to have repetitive events. But I think I figured out a way around it. So essentially the way it works is I'll create different sequences for different kind of scenarios, and then kind of combine them together to create the effect I want. For instance, whenever you're casting magic, you'll have this sort of magical effect play where you'll have this, this magical circle will appear underneath you, and you'll get the sound effect. Then next up we have the actual spell effects. Now this is one of the main reasons I wanted to use Sequencer, was so I could have the timing of the spell effect and the timing of impact happen when I wanted to. Without using the Sequencer, it's actually really hard to make sure that the actual impact of the damage happens, precisely when you want it to, rather than having it happen at the start or the end. If you're setting this up in Blueprint, for example, it's difficult to determine when exactly the impact and the game effects are going to be applied to the target, and you kind of have to just guess and set a timer or something. But this way I can set them specifically in. So this is an example of that. This is an example of the fire effect, or I believe this is, fire one. This is when you cast fire on a single enemy. And we'll do the one where you cast a fire on all enemies. You get. And by using Sequencer, I can get a lot more specific with the particle and with sound effects and stuff as well. So. Now, what you'll notice right here is a little subsequence, and this, I believe, is called, Battle Impact. So, when I mentioned before about events and sequencers kind of being difficult to handle, which if any of you used it, you might understand what I mean. It's mainly because reusing the same event over and over again in different sequencers is tricky, but what I figured out is I will just create one sequence that has that event in, and then just reuse it over and over again. So this is that, what I call Battle Impact, and what this does is it, just whenever it hits this event, it'll open the director, and it will run the impact notify on combatant, which essentially just notifies the combatant that, hey, whatever spell you cast or action you used, run the impact effects on whoever it's targeting. So then I can just take a sequence, drop that on, and means it'll automatically run that event, and I don't need to custom add it to every single sequence. So. And lastly, we have the actual character animation. So the way we have it here is we take our magic cast animation with a circle, we just apply it on, we additionally add on a animation for the actual character, and then she goes like this. Now if you look on this magic cast animation right here, we have it triggers the cast notify, and that's when it triggers the fireball effect that I just showed. It's right when it hits that part of the animation. And the only other thing, so yeah, when it runs through here, right there it'll cast the magic and have the impact, and when both of these sequences are done, it'll complete the animation, complete the turn, move on to the next turn. And the last thing, to add a bit more flair to it, So we can add in custom camera angles. So we get that effect. So it's kind of a zoom in, cast. And so lastly, when we put all those together, you get this. Next up, I talk about adding new locations to the game. This is one of them. This is one of the games one of the dungeons a little bit before I'd say the middle of the game. Be one of the locations I'm adding. The dungeons are there's a lot of them and a lot of maps, so I'm keeping them all relatively short. I'm not trying to make anything that goes on super long. My thought process more is like something around Chrono Trigger length, so keep the dungeons relatively short. And I can maybe have more of them that way, and so it doesn't feel like the player's getting too burnt out on anything. And this is one of the towns you'll visit around the same time. Yeah, right now it's all keeping stuff super simple. Kind of just get the basics I need to have a somewhat reasonable environment, and I can work on adding details later. I just want to make something that looks passable for right now. This is another one of the towns I made, and I guess this would be a good opportunity to talk about one of the new tools I added. So, since I'm adding a lot of different towns, a lot of different environments, and I don't want them all to look, exactly the same, I wanted to give a bit of a character to each of them. I figured a good way to do that would is having kind of sort of a unified color palette in each location. So one of the things I did is I have this Orion sky, which right now the skybox is broken. I don't know why, but it's pure white, but that's kind of irrelevant. Essentially, this is just an actor I add into every level, and it controls the entire sky, post-processing, fog, all that stuff, so it's in one actor. But more importantly, for right now, is it allows me to have these different colors that I can set for that specific level. So, for example, I'm in a town and I want to have sort of a unified look among all the buildings. I have things where I can change the wall, roof, and wood tint to them. So, for instance, here I have the roof set to blue, but I can easily change those to be green. Heck, that might even look better. I don't know. We'll keep it blue now, though. I can change the walls to be kind of black. Maybe make the wood be purple. And I've got a different look to that. And so that way I can reuse a lot of the same assets, but in different areas. I give them a different color scheme, and it changes some stuff. And there's more I can do with this. I could add some, texture masks that I could cycle to add things like dirt or more variety. So there's other ways I could improve that. But that essentially gives me a quick and easy way to make vast sweeping changes to stuff and allow for faster iteration, and that's really important. And it's very easy to set up too. I just have new material parameters that I can, set the colors into, and then in the actual material, for example, this is the roof material for these assets. I have them set to layers, so I'll just add a new layer that I call Omega Tint Roof, set the scalar to maximum. And all this layer does is it grabs, in this case, the material parameter called roof, and applies that tint to the base color. So I can just toss this onto any old material, and it'll automatically tint it to whatever the color of the roof I want to be is. So while I was working on new environments, I started to think about money for the game, or balancing the currency, because that's one of the things that RPGs need is your currency. And that essentially sent me down a rabbit hole of thinking about, well, how does money work in this world? What do people use for money? And without going too deep into the story of it, because economics isn't that interesting to everyone, admittedly, essentially the money in this world is used throughout all the nations. It's something called rins, and rins is coins that are created from a material called orinium. It's basically this world's equivalent of gold. So rather than something like you getting money from monsters you kill or stuff like that, which is kind of silly as an idea, I instead came up with this idea that as you walk throughout the world, you'll discover these orinium deposits, which you can then hit with your magic sword, and that will give you a bit of orinium. And so after collecting your orinium coins, you can take them to any town or whatever that has a smelter, and you can then have them smelted into rins, which is the currency in the game. And an idea that I'm playing with, but I want to see how it works first, is the idea that at different points in the game, at different locations, you'll have different exchange rates for orinium, so it would be more beneficial to go to different locations to have them smelted into money. And so now I have 5 rins. And that kind of ties into a larger conversation for games like this, which is one of player convenience versus immersion, which aren't always at opposites, but oftentimes what is more convenient for the player will be less realistic and less immersive. And I think in RPGs, while you definitely want to make the game fun, leaning more on the immersive side can be what makes it fun, even if it's not always more convenient. So I still need to decide if that's the direction I want to take, but it's at least a thought I had. Next thing to talk about is the elemental field attacks. Now, since this game is heavily inspired by classic JRPGs, especially Final Fantasy, a big part of the story is going around and collecting these 4 relics of the elements. Not necessarily crystals, but the idea I'm going with right now is as you do so, you'll unlock a new, essentially, element you can use for your field attack. Because on the field, you have an attack, which can be used for different things. Typically, you hit an enemy, get an advantage in battle. You can use it to, like I showed before, hit a rhenium and mine it. But the thought I was getting is, essentially, as you get the different elements, they will unlock new ways of exploring or unlocking new areas. So, for example, here, right now, as you can see in the corner, you can switch between elements using the keys or the gamepad, the D-pad on the gamepad. If I switch to the fire elements and walk up to let's just go normally. I have a normal attack. If I I can't get past these vines here, so I'll hit them with any of my other elements, nothing happens. But if I hit them with fire, boom, then they'll disappear. Now, obviously, they need more effects of actually, like, burning away. But that's kind of the idea, is that you can use fire to get past those, or you might use wind or water or rocks to get over other environmental hazards or obstacles. And it essentially adds a little bit more of a replayability to older areas, as you can take those elements and go back and unlock new areas and do more stuff. Next up, I've been working a lot on optimizing the overworld, because the overworld was the main thing that was hitting performance in the game, was really dragging things down. And I found out that was largely due to the trees, which were essentially I was just using the same trees that I had used in the main game, which right now, since I'm using 5.0 and I don't have all the nanite foliage advantages, has a lot of overdraw. And when you scale those down and add hundreds of them into the game, that really stacks on performance. So instead, at least for right now, for the overworld, I have created my own custom trees, which admittedly don't look amazing. They're just kind of a 2 billboards stacked together. But from the side, and especially from a distance, I don't think you can totally tell. I might switch over long term to a actual, just a small, like a low poly mesh that I'll stick instead. But for now, this definitely improves performance. And I have a few different types of trees depending on the continent. Like you have, don't mind the black grass. That'll be fixed up when we actually play the game. Yeah, so I have these types of trees here. I have a different type of trees for, this is a different area. This is a different area in the overworld, and so this has a different type of trees. And this is yet another area in the overworld, and so this has a different type of trees. And so, yeah, it's a way of, you can differentiate each area, and also it saves on performance using this billboard method. I've also, as you can see, although it's not showing up well because of the over budget, but I have started adding tutorials to the game, but they're in a very early state, but at least the system's in place. And the last thing I want to talk about is some of the changes I've made to the questing and dialogue system. See, previously these were handled through the use of flow assets and state machines, and these both worked out well, but the problem I ran into is, considering the amount of dialogue and scenes that are in this game, especially if I want to go back and make iterations, when adding new scenes or when going back and adding iterations, that method of doing things surprisingly adds up on time very quickly. And on top of that, when I am writing the script, I am writing it in a CSV format, in essentially a Google Sheet. And it becomes a lot of work to have to essentially copy and paste that over and over. Now, in a previous episode, I showed my method for importing CSV sheets into the game and converting it into flow files. But the funny thing is, even in that scenario, I still have to go in and add all the nodes in manually so the data can be properly imported. And that just took too long. So instead, what I decided on is creating a new system that can directly import data from external string text files into the game and use it for things like scenes or quest flow. And while it's not as pretty or fancy, or at least right now not as secure either, it makes development much faster. So for instance, what I'm about to show off here is an example of how I can write a quest in a CSV file, or quest or dialogue in a CSV file, and then have that data read directly into the game. So first we have a test quest here well, it's a Google Sheet. And essentially here, I have an event column that just tells me what type of event this row is. Level means it's going to load a new level. DLG means it's going to play a dialogue. And title means it's essentially, this is uniquely for the chapters, it's just going to show a title card for the chapter. And once that's done, if the rest of the lines are empty, then it considers this quest complete. So let's go ahead and just run that quest and see it begins. There it is, loading up that level, which is that first event. And now we've begun this bit of dialogue. So let's go ahead and hop over to the actual script, and you can see I have stuff, events, data, the dialogue written out here in this script. So it's a similar thing. We have event tags, and I have references for that. So for example, camera here, it'll cut to this camera in the reference column. Timer will determine, how long we wait between this line and the next. Camera again, timer, then we have more dialogue. Expression was drawn in yet, but essentially this is the way I have the script laid out. So if we actually run through that, we'll get our line of dialogue. Cut, we got a little delay there. And we're back on to the rest of this. And so all it's doing here is I got this data, I have this imported into the game, and by imported into the game, I mean it's just in a folder, which I should be able to show you, which right now is just, loaded right into here. It's this file right here, Meet Evie is the one I'm reading. I'm just reading the data directly from this CSV. If I load it up, all this info is just being loaded directly into the game. So if I ever need to make edits, or when I'm just making new scenes, I just gotta write them in here, download them, put in the file name that I want to run, or the dialogue name that I want to run, and it loads it right up. And I don't have to do any copy and pasting. I don't have to re-add in nodes over and over again, because if I want a new line or a dialogue or an event, I just drop down and type it in. And this process, though not as pretty or as fancy or whatever, is much, much faster and better when you're wanting to write a game as big as I have, because an average conversation in my game lasts for around 30 to 50 lines of dialogue, and we're looking at hundreds and hundreds of scenes in the game. So yeah, it's really important to make sure that the development for that is as smooth as possible. And again, referring back to the quest, once we're done with this dialogue, it should go to this quest file. So let's just skip through all this. I don't want to give you too much of the dialogue away. Look, there we go. There's our title card, and should be able to close out of it. That's a problem with a title quest, but yeah. And that is the method I'm currently using now for dialogue and quest flows, because it speeds stuff up a lot. On this special occasion of a 1-year anniversary, I'm going to do a little bit of a pro gamer move and recommend 2 devlog series this time. First up, we have Project Insomnia by Ruben Ronquillo. This is a first-person dungeon-crawling RPG, very much in the style of something like Etrian Odyssey or Wizardry or those types, where you move around on a grid, you have turn-based combat, that sort of style. He has a very entertaining style of presentation, I think, and it's a type of game that I very much enjoy seeing made, and even enjoy playing a little bit sometimes here and there. And he only has about 40 views on each video, so be absolutely sure to go and check him out, especially if that's the sort of thing you'd like. And next up is Space 64 by Fire Dragon 04. This appears to be a sort of a Nintendo 64 style action-adventure sci-fi game. He's already gone through the process of modeling his main character, who's this four-armed alien. And in his most recent devlog, he created this sort of coral environment with a sort of a green and maroon color scheme. And it looks great. I'm very much happy with how it's looking. So that sounds like your type of thing. Be sure to check him out as well. And that's all I have for this month. As always, thanks everyone for watching. Thank you to a great year of game development. I'm glad everyone continues to seem to enjoy the stuff I put out. But I will still be working on the game, and if all goes well, I would love to have some version of the game ready by this time next year, but you never know. Regardless, thanks everyone for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see y'all next time.